In August 1924, Americans were absorbed by the trial of Leopold and Loeb. Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, two affluent and intellectually gifted young men from Chicago, were charged with the kidnapping and murder of 14-year-old Bobby Franks. At the time, it was called the crime of the century. When the two confessed, they said they were trying to commit the perfect crime as an intellectual exercise, influenced by their fascination with Nietzschean philosophy and detective fiction. Leopold and Loeb were represented by the legendary defense lawyer Clarence Darrow. Darrow's objective, in which he succeeded, was to prevent his clients from being given the death sentence. On the 11th of August, 1924, President Calvin Coolidge delivered this scintillating speech from the White House lawn.
The country needs every ounce of its energy to restore itself. The costs of government are all assessed upon the people.
Even more exciting than Coolidge's discussion about taxation and the economy was a new technology called phonofilm, which enabled this first ever talking movie of an American president. In baseball, there was a tight pennant race in the American League, but the Philadelphia A's were not a part of it. They were comfortably ensconced in last place. The National League Phillies, on the other hand, were improving on their previous year's season when they finished in the basement. In August of 1924, they were in 7th place, where they would end the season a mere 37 games behind the pennant-winning New York Giants. You could go to a motion picture house and see Buster Keaton in The Navigator. Or, if you were feeling lazy, you could just stay home and listen to your favorite tunes on your Victor gramophone, which was probably manufactured in Camden, New Jersey. And if you were a real techie, you could try to listen to the music through the static on your Atwater Kent radio, which was made in Philadelphia. On the main line, the Inquirer was reporting that a Wynwood woman had a box containing $30,000 worth of jewelry, and she left it on the running board of her husband's car while he drove off to Cape May with her in the passenger seat. Keep in mind, what cost $30,000 in 1924 would be worth about $532,000 now. With the help of neighborhood tipsters, police traced the jewelry to the home of Charles Butler in South Ardmore. The Inquirer wrote that Butler's wife had been sporting the more costly pieces in the Negro colony of South Ardmore and elsewhere in Haverford Township ever since. At first, Butler denied knowing anything about it, but then he recanted and handed over the box with what was left of the jewelry. Reluctantly, Butler told police that his wife had gone south to visit relatives, but that's all he would tell them. He was held at the police station for further questioning. Eventually, Bessie Butler was found and arrested in Newport News, Virginia, with some, but not all, of the jewelry her husband found, and with $2,000 cash in hand. A swarm of Japanese beetles that had infested Philadelphia previously made its presence known in Ballackinwood. U.S. government entomologists are trying to find the perfect spray to eradicate them. Mr. Charles E. Mather of Avonwood Court in Haverford and his grandson, Charles E. Mather II, were traveling in Europe, but they're on their way home now. Mr. Mather, a well-known businessman, socialite, and sportsman, lived in this house known as Avonwood Court. Located between Avon Road and Rose Lane, the house was demolished in 2020. Here's some exciting news. Mrs. Richard Crozier of Marion will spend part of the month with Mr. and Mrs. Humbert B. Powell of Wayne at Pleasant Island, Maine. Sadly, Mrs. Crozier would also be back in the news 9 years later, when she would be found dead in the garage of her home at 325 Bowman Avenue. Before we move to something a little more pleasant, we might as well get this out of the way. An unidentified man was found hanging from a tree in West Manayunk. Police are pretty sure it was a case of suicide. A 34-year-old George Earl III, captain of the Bryn Mawr polo team, was getting his club ready for the upcoming season. 10 years later, Earl will be back in the news when he was elected governor of Pennsylvania. First Democrat to accomplish that feat since 1890. 21-year-old Robert Henry was incarcerated at Huntington Reformatory. He was convicted of robbery. He was riding in a Pennsylvania Railroad car that left Downingtown and was on its way to Philadelphia. Henry was being transferred to Eastern State Penitentiary. As the train was leaving Paoli, Henry asked for permission to go to the washroom. After a few minutes, when Henry hadn't returned to his seat, J.G. Schaefer, the parole officer who was escorting him, got suspicious. Schaefer went to the washroom to check up on him. There was no sign of Henry, but the window was smashed, and presumably Henry escaped through it. The only description that police had of Henry was that he was wearing a khaki shirt and handcuffs, and there are no other news reports indicating that he was ever arrested again. And finally, somebody in Rosemont wants to hire a white chauffeur. The job also involves some gardening. The lucky guy who lands his position also gets free housing for himself and his wife. And even the heating in their apartment is paid for. That's going to do it for this edition of 100 Years Ago on the Main Line. There's a like button down there you can hit if you're into that sort of thing. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. I hope to see you in September.